We're sitting next to each other in the airplane. The plane is about to take off. She's kind of grabbing onto the arms and I'm looking out the window. And at the same, almost exact same time, I said, I love this moment. And she goes, I hate this moment. We're experiencing exactly the same thing. And she's completely stressed out by it, and I'm not stressed out by it at all. Whether it's your child's F, whether it's the deadline that's looming that you're worried about, whether it's, a mistake in a communication. We all say stuff that we wish we hadn't said. If we're future tripping and we're worried, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when this comes up and how am I going to handle it? I want people to be willing to consider that thing that is stressing you out right now, you might be able to think about it differently. If you're going to create a story, create one that makes you feel good.
ADHD Rewired, episode 101. This is the show designed to help those of us who have really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. My name is Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, coach, and consultant. We know that starting can be the hardest part, so let's get started. But first, let me thank our sponsors. Support for this podcast comes from Audible. For a free audiobook download, go to erictivers.com/audible for a link for that free download and for some hand-picked recommendations. Go to erictivers.com/audible for your free audiobook download. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. I am happy to welcome into the virtual studios Diane Dempster. Diane is a certified professional coach. She's a speaker, educator, and co-founder of ImpactADHD.com. She works with parents of kids with ADHD or other complex issues to radically improve their professional and family life by gaining new skills, increasing their confidence, and learning to use coaching techniques in their parenting. Diane, welcome to ADHD Rewired. I'm so happy to have you on today.
I'm excited to be here today, Eric, and talking to your audience.
So now we officially have had both halves of Impact ADHD.
Right. Elaine was here and now I'm here.
Yeah. So I know one of the things that we are going to be talking about today is stress and the impact of stress on parenting. And I think, we were talking yesterday about how do we kind of extract that? Because I know you work primarily with parents. But how do we extract that to kind of the broader kind of ADHD audience, especially those who are adults with ADHD? So where do you want to begin with talking about stress?
No, I think that's a really great question because my main audience is parents, but the reality is that, when we're talking about stress, it impacts absolutely everybody. And, the majority of the people in your audience either have ADHD themselves or they have somebody in their close relationship that has ADHD. And what I would tell you is that, a lot of what you do and what other ADHD coaches do is to focus on what it takes to manage the ADHD brain. And what I would tell you is, I don't know if it's more important or as important, but managing stress and how stress impacts your brain is such a critical part of it for everybody, whether you have ADHD or not, or particularly with ADHD. And I'll talk about it more, I'm sure, later, because the part of your brain that's impacted by your ADHD is the same part of your brain that's impacted by stress. And so if you're stressed and your ADHD, your ability to be successful is even more impacted. So I think that this is such an important topic to everybody. And then the other thing I would say for our audience, particularly the parents that I work with, it can be wearing. It can, wear you out. It can be overwhelming to deal with all the logistics and the challenges, whether it's your own ADHD or your kid's ADHD. And so being stressed out is a pretty normal thing, and we see it a lot.
And the more I learn from kind of non-ADHD people and about just like productivity, we keep learning from the kind of brain science and from business that the less we do, the more we can get done. It's like this whole notion of, well, if we put in 80, 90 hours a week, that we're going to get all this stuff done. And what they find is that the inverse is very true. The less we have going on, the more we can actually get done. So when we are dealing with stress, that's, I think, a clear kind of connection between if we are feeling overwhelmed, if we are feeling there's just too much on our plate. Like there's no productivity strategy, technique, system that's really going to help. But you have to recognize the stress and the role that stress is impacting into our lives. So Dan, what are the kind of the main or some of the primary areas of stress you see in people's lives that you work with?
Well, I think can we take it a step back and just say, what really is stress?
Yeah,
and, and stress is a natural reaction to something that threatens your livelihood. I don't know how else to say it, but, it's just, we, at its core, the brain feels threatened. It creates hormones. Those hormones are designed to help us to do something. And the hormones also produce stress in our body. And what happens is that, the stress reaction, let's call it that, was created for emergencies. I mean, it's a very primal experience. If you look at animals and lower primates, I mean, all of the people that came before us, right? That didn't have this creative brain that we have as humans. It's that fight or flight. It's I'm about to be chased by a mountain lion, and I've got to be able to run. Or, and in humans, sometimes you see
when there's a mountain lion or a bear behind us, that's helpful.
It's exactly, which is important. So stress is really important. Or if you need to be able to, if a car falls on your partner and you need to be able to lift that car off your partner to save their life or your child or whatever it is, I mean, having that intense stress reaction is extraordinarily helpful. Mm-hmm. The challenge is that the body, it's a destructive energy. I mean, it's designed to be extraordinarily powerful, and it's not sustainable. And so if you look at the statistics that talk about the stress levels in our society, the percentage of people that are unhappy in their jobs, the percentage of people that are just kind of walking around going through life feeling stressed out and overwhelmed, it literally wears out your body. I mean, the disease rates, the depression rates, all of the stuff that I'm sure you dealing with in your practice and we see in society are all results of an increased stress level. And so the challenge is that we're using this energy, we're in this stress state much more than our bodies were designed for. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of it is, that the brain doesn't distinguish between the mountain lion and some other threat, right? So it's designed for when you're in a real emergency. But if your boss comes to you and says, Eric, you've got a deadline tomorrow, and you're like, holy crap, I didn't prepare for this. It's just exactly the same as the mountain lion. Or if you've got a stack of papers on your desk that completely overwhelm you, that you don't know how to manage through and even begin to tackle, and it creates stress for you, it's that same stress that you would have if you're being chased by a bear. And so it's really important to know that
then we tap into the fight or flight, and we often flight by saying, I'm not going to deal with this right now.
Exactly. So it's kind of like you go and you hide in your closet, or you go do some diverting activity, or you let something distract you, or whatever it is. If you're a fight, maybe you take it out on your partner, or you take it out on your kid, or you take it, or you're beating yourself up.
Or freeze.
Or you freeze. I can't move forward. I get stuck, those sorts of things. And so it's, to start off with, to know that it's really normal, but it's not sustainable. And then the other piece of it is that there's real stress, and then there's imagined stress, which is even a more kind of theoretical sort of thing. But for most people, the majority of our stress is in our head and not actually happening to us now.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's amazing when we think about that, the idea of, as a culture, I think that we almost brag about how busy we are. It's almost like the status symbol. It's like, oh yeah, well, I worked a 60-hour week. Oh yeah, I worked an 80-hour
week, right?
And it's like, and this is like a bragging right, and I've been guilty of it myself. We brag about how busy we are, and it's crazy making. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have to, as a society, it's instead of rewarding and praising how long and how many hours we're working, I think it's so important that we are having this discussion about, are we working smart? Are we working efficiently? What is the toll it's taking on our personal lives, on our family lives, on our work lives, when we are so stressed because there is just too much pressure from all the competing interests around us?
Right. And so I think that you're right, because there's practical aspects to stress. If we're doing more than is necessary for whatever reason, it does increase stress for us. I think that for most of us, we wouldn't say, okay, yeah, I want to work a 60-hour week. I mean, most of us, if we're working a 60-hour week, it's because we feel like we have to, or that there's something it's a supposed to, right? So it becomes more of a way you look at it rather
Mm-hmm.
than the logistics of it. And so it's one thing to say, okay, let's slow down and let's take things a little easier. Come on, Eric. I mean, the reality is that none of us are like doing this to ourselves on purpose. Nobody really wants to be on the hamster wheel. We just end up there. We don't know a way off. But what I want to say is that it's the hamster wheel and it's the way we look at the situation that's really causing the stress rather than the hamster wheel itself. So let me give you an example, because it's really about, the stories we tell ourselves. It's like, oh my gosh, I got to get this done. If I don't do this, I'll lose my job. Or, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person because I haven't been able to do this and it's hard for me to organize my stuff. Or, oh my gosh, parenting, right? So, oh my gosh, my child is going to be living in my basement when I'm 35 years old. When they're 35 years old, I've got to do something to fix this thing because they didn't turn in their homework tonight, or they're getting a failing grade, or whatever it is. So what happens is that we have a situation and our brain says, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It has to stop. In comes the mountain lion, and I have to fix this. And parents, we talk about, you get into search and destroy mode, right? So if I've got, my kid gets an F in band class, and I still remember my kid's first F. I mean, I have two kids, and they both have had more than one F, but his first one is in band class because he was forgetting to turn in his little log. He was practicing. We had a structure in place so that he would remember to practice. He liked band. He loved the teacher. He was just forgetting to turn in his stinking chart, and he got an F in band. Well, the first time it happened, it's like, oh my gosh, the world is going to end. There's this F on my child's report card. What's going to happen? Well, 5 years later, fast forward, it's like, oh, how many Fs did you get this semester, sweetie? It's just, and it's more of a mindset. I'm not stressed out by it anymore. I still
Mm-hmm.
problem solve around it.
Mm-hmm.
The part of the battle here is, if I see everything that happens to me as an emergency, as a mountain lion, then I'm honestly, I'm going to say this harshly, we create a large percentage of our own stress. And I don't mean to say that because you could suddenly wake up tomorrow and go, okay, I'm fine, I'm not stressed. But if you know that it's in your control and the way you see the situation is really what's causing the stress,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm hoping that maybe that empowers your audience a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if we look at everything that goes on, if we think that everything is important, then how can we prioritize what's actually important?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to grades too, I when I have a client in my office, one of the first things I have them do in the first session is we take failure bows. And I talk about my office is going to be a safe place to fail, and that
Mm-hmm.
that it's failure is not a bad thing if we can get feedback from it, if we
Mm-hmm.
can learn from it. Like if you failed a test and you learned a really valuable lesson from that, and that changed how you do something, I'm so happy that you failed that test.
Mm-hmm.
Because but if you fail the test and think that you are a failure, well, that's where we start to get into where learned helplessness kind of begins.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a big difference between messing something up and thinking that you are a mess up.
Right. No, and so there's two parts of it. Is one is the judgment you put on yourself, which is what you're talking about. Is it's pretty human to judge a situation as good or bad. That we all do that. I mean, there's non-judgment out there, but it's hard to see something and go, well, gee, I really wish that hadn't happened.
Right.
But then there's the taking it further and saying, I'm bad because that happened. And I think that the thing that I like to remember is that everybody's reaction to something is different, and that gives us hope, right? So think about it. I don't know if you like to fly. I love to go places and travel a lot. And I enjoy it. And I enjoy being in planes. It doesn't stress me. Every once in a while there's a lot of turbulence and I get a little
You
freaked
and
out.
I are opposites.
You and I are opposites. I still remember I was traveling with Elaine, and maybe it wasn't Elaine, but I was traveling with a colleague, and we're sitting next to each other in the airplane, and we, get to that moment, and the plane is about to take off, and I look over, and she's kind of grabbing onto the arms, and I'm looking out the window, and at the same, almost exact same time, I said, I love this moment. And she goes, I hate this moment, and it's just that sort of, we're experiencing exactly the same thing. And she's completely stressed out by it, and I'm not stressed out by it at all. And so I'm saying that to know that, that whether it's your child's F, whether it's, the the deadline that's looming that you're worried about, whether it's, a mistake in communication. We all say stuff that we wish we hadn't said to people, and we like work it over in our head and we're worried about it. If we're future tripping and we're worried, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when this comes up and how am I going to handle it? I mean, there is I want people to be willing to consider that thing that is stressing you out right now, you might be able to think about it differently.
To share a very similar story with the airplane. A couple of years ago, I went and saw Stephen Shore, who's an adult with autism, give this presentation. And he was talking about, and this actually was helpful for me to hear his perspective of it. So it's very common for adults or for people with autism to flap their hands. And he was talking about how he really likes flying. And, so he was saying, for him, the more turbulence, the better, because an airplane is very much like a person with autism. They get flappy when they're happy. And so when you think about the wings of an airplane, are designed to be able to wobble a bit because it takes in that turbulence. So when I heard him say that, I'm like, wow, that's a completely different experience than I've heard it. Because when I get turbulence, like that physical sensation, it creates the anxiety, then it creates the imagination. I call imagination's dark side. We're going to go down. We're going to die. It's like, oh my God, no, we're not. It's like when we think about statistically how safe flying actually is compared to driving. And just to think about a physical sensation is just that. And if we can take the judgment out of the physical sensation, we can interpret it differently. And so it sounds like what you're saying is so much of how we interpret stress is how do we interpret the sensations and the experiences that are occurring.
Yeah. So can I give them a tip and make it maybe a little bit more practical?
We love tips. Yeah.
So the reality is that in any moment, if it's not happening right now, we're creating a story about it. I mean, even if I know that I've got a meeting at 12 o'clock and it's supposed to happen and it's with Eric and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's not happening right now. And so it's something that I'm doing up here in my head. It's not reality. Yeah. And the same thing with anything happened in the past. It's my memory of it, that sort of thing. And so the tip I love to give people is if you're going to create a story, create one that makes you feel good. Because here's the thing.
Say that one more time because I think it's just worth repeating because it's powerful.
If you're going to create a story, create one that makes you feel good. And so the story I'm going to tell is, and I'm going to tell it on myself is, I said I've got two kids and this, I think this is applicable to anybody. I was sitting at my desk, had a really important deadline, and I got an email out of the blue from my fifth grader's teacher. And all of the email said was, I need to talk to you after school today.
Oh gosh.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And I'm like going through my head and did my son tell me anything? And is there, you start doing that, right? And so she was in school, so she wasn't in a place where I could call her in that moment and fix it and take care of it. And I knew I had this deadline and I had 2 hours before I could talk to her. And I'm like, I started back in my work and it stalled me completely. And I was just like, all I could think about was, what did my son do or what's going on or whatever else? And you do that. And it was like, and I realized at some point in the process, I'm like, Diane, you're creating a story. You have no idea why this teacher wants to talk to you, yet you've decided that it's the worst thing ever and your child's going to be expelled or that he's going to be arrested or whatever, whatever the thoughts are in your head in that moment. And so I was like, okay, take a few deep breaths. And so, you do your calming and you go, okay, what else can I think about? What else could be going on? And so for the next 2 hours, I was convinced that my son was getting an award and that she needed to talk to me about the awards presentation. And here's the thing. I mean, I honestly now, however many years later, I don't even remember what she wanted to talk to me about. But for those 2 hours, I needed something other than my child is going to jail in my head so that I could work. And so I think that that's the point. Is like when you notice yourself creating a story about, oh my gosh, I've got to have this, this guy is going to dump me, or my boss is going to be mad at me because I missed the deadline, or what am I going to do about X, Y, and Z? If you can, there's a few steps we want you to take. Because number one is kind of get back in the problem solving part of your brain. So take those few deep breaths. We call it escaping the threat cycle. You want to just either take some deep breaths, I drink a lot of water because water calms the brain.
I don't drink enough water.
Yeah, actually that's tip number 2, but we'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah, I'm going to take a drink too.
Okay. So you want to, calm your brain and then be willing to consider that something else is true. I mean, I think that that's really it sounds a little bit like brainwashing, and it kind of is. And you don't have to go,
Not all brainwashing is bad.
Not all brainwashing is bad, but the reality is you're creating a story anyway. So again, if you're going to create a story, create one that makes you feel good.
And I think that's so important that we're creating a story anyway.
Right.
So create a positive story.
Right. So why would, it's like so many of us, and I think I'm a little older than you, Eric, but I was raised by parents who taught us to prepare for the worst and then be happy when something else happens. Right. And so we go into these, I don't even know what to call it, but it's like we're constantly troubleshooting and contingency planning. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And, the next thing you know, it's like you've spent 2 hours looking at the worst case scenario, some of which, and I'm a statistician, I'm an analyst by training. And so it's like the probability of something like that happening is so small. And you've just spent how many hours worrying about it? I mean, statistically, it makes no sense. But from a human nature perspective, it's really, really, so I want to say that too. It's really, really normal. We all do it. And that's what stresses us out as a society.
And the one thing too I would add, especially for parents who have ADHD, is we tend to be, quick on our feet in a lot of ways. So utilize that strength. So instead of spending all this energy trying to anticipate what might happen, just know whatever the situation brings you, you'll be okay dealing with it at that moment when you can actually deal with it, when you have the facts, when you're not making up these absurd stories to yourself.
Yeah. And so you're saying like trust your own resilience, which is a great thing to think about. It's kind of like if you get into that worrying mode to say, you know what? I know that I'm a resourceful person. I can handle this. Or a lot of people, and I don't know your audience at all, Eric, but a lot of people who have strong faith will go, I trust that there's some bigger hand in this, or there's, something better is going to happen out of this situation. So trusting something, it can be a really powerful way to shift you when you get into that sort of, what do I do sort of situation.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, it's like, all right, crap happens, but we have choices on how we deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And you have choices. And the thing you have the ability to choose more than anything else is how you want to look at the situation.
Right. Right. If you can't change it, change how you think about it.
Yeah. I love that. So does it make sense to go back to the water and the deep breath? Because that is my second tip.
Yeah. So the water. Now, I was actually curious about that because, there's certain things that I find that it's sort of like, I know that I should do this. I know it's good, but I don't have a deep enough of a why. And sometimes for me, when I have that really kind of solid why, it helps, like it increases that intrinsic motivation. So,
so let's go back to the biology of it. Okay.
Yeah, please.
So the threat cycle, right? The brain feels threatened.
There were air quotes for those of you who were just listening.
Wait, you're just listening, right?
Right. Most of you will probably never see this video. I have about probably 100 recorded videos that most people have never seen. One day.
Anyway, so air quotes. So the threat cycle, it's threat lead, your brain feels threatened. It produces the hormone. The hormone allows you to act. And what happens from an action perspective is that you prepare to fight or flight, which means, your blood pressure shifts, your heart rate changes, you actually shift from the problem solving part of your brain, from the frontal lobe, into the amygdala, right? So we call it amygdala hijack. So
that lizard brain.
The lizard brain, right? So you become more primal. Literally, all your choices are, I'm going to either kill what's in front of me, or I'm going to run away. That's really, when it comes down to it, that's what happens. And so when we need to be able to, we all need to be able to problem solve, even when you're in that situation where it's like, oh my gosh, I've got this deadline. Running away is not the best solution when you have a deadline, right? So and yelling at your boss when you have a deadline is not always the best solution. So you need to be able to get back into that problem solving part of your brain. And so most of us need something for that to happen. I mean, it's so biology. Mm-hmm. The deep breath will do that. It actually shifts the hormones in the brain when you take a deep breath. So instead of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, there's other hormones that are produced that will help you to relax, help you to reclaim, we call it reclaiming your brain, get out of amygdala hijack and get back into problem solving mode. The other thing is the reason water works, and I don't know complete biology of it, but what someone explained to me is if you take a few sips of water, the animal in your brain goes, oh, I'm at the watering hole. All must be well.
That's right.
And apparently you can't drink water and be stressed at the same exact time is kind of what I've heard it explained from a biology perspective.
Yes. And I know for myself, when I used to work with kids who were kind of highly aggressive, that was one of the things we always tried to get them to that point where they were calm enough where they'd be willing to drink some water. So it's because once we can get the water in them, we start to see it kind of coming down a bit. And so, yeah, it's absolutely true. It's great when we can learn that the why behind the little things that actually make a big difference.
So what becomes important to me, and I think that there's two pieces of this, particularly for the ADHD brain. So one has to do with emotional intensity, and then one has to do just with the biology of it. So from an emotional intensity perspective, there's a lot of ADDers who have really high intensity. So they don't just go, if you think of stress being from 0 to 10, there are some folks and I think that there are many ADDers that are more likely to be like this. They go 1 to 10.
Right.
Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they escalate gradually. And it's like, okay, I know I'm starting to get stressed out. I can take a few deep breaths. I can calm back down again. But so I think it's important to know that, if you're not aware of your escalation cycle, it can be really difficult. And all of a sudden you're completely stressed out. And I don't know who you are, but if you're a 10, you're not going to remember to drink some water. It's just not going to happen.
So let me ask you this. Is there anything that you suggest in helping someone who maybe is that, they have the 0 and the 1 and then the 10?
Yeah.
How do they increase the awareness of everything in between?
Well, I think that there's prevention and there's management, and they kind of go hand in hand in that instance. And so what I encourage particularly families to do is to reach agreement on what you want to do when anybody gets triggered. So it could be mom getting triggered. It could be dad getting triggered. It could be Johnny getting triggered. It doesn't matter. But we have this routine that we do when people get triggered. So we call it out, not with judgment, but we find a way to gently say, hey, the room's getting hot right now, or you seem a little bit upset, or, if you can use a code word, like my kids and I have been doing this long enough, we can say trigger. And we all know, okay, somebody in the room's triggered. You're not pointing the finger at me, but we know somebody's triggered right now. And that's the first step to go, okay, somebody's there. And then
so I would like to know what does Diane Dempster do when she gets triggered?
Well, it's interesting because I believe that part of what helps, particularly when you with a lot of moms, particularly that we tend to be really resilient, and so things bounce up against us a lot. And so I've got 2 teenagers, and it's like they're throwing stuff at me, and it's like, okay, okay. It's like, and then you kind of start to get more and more, and your resilience drops, and it's 8:00 at night, and your kid once again is arguing with you about whether or not they can get off their Xbox. And so sometimes you have to let the pressure off. And so one thing that it becomes okay in my family, that if you're upset, it's people lose their cool, and it happens. But if that happens, you have to own it. You have to apologize for it. And you have to know that it's not something we want to do to each other all the time. So I think that that's the first thing I would say is that I'm a recovering yeller, but I find that when there's a point at which it's like the only thing that's going to feel better in that moment is if I yell. And my kids go, yep, mom just reached her boiling point, and it's not about me. They don't take it personally. It's just sometimes we get so angry that we have outbursts. Mm-hmm. Now, if I sit there and berate my kids and judge my kids and say things that are hurtful, it's entirely different. So I've figured out how to say things. I was talking to a client about this yesterday. What I tend to do, and this is what I was coaching her around, is, I tend to put down the hammer, right? So, but I do it in a way that's completely crazy. So it's like, okay, you're never going to play your Xbox ever again in your entire life, right? Which I know is completely ludicrous. Mm-hmm. My kids know is I'm never going to enforce that. So, I mean, I think there are parents who say that kind of out of non-consciously, but I do that consciously as a way of saying, I'm so angry right now, I can't even parent. I need to calm down. So sometimes I will let the pressure off. Other times I'll go, you know what? I'm upset. I need to go take a timeout. And I'll give myself a timeout and go, okay, I'm going to come back. You always have to promise to come back.
Yes, that's typically what I do. I mean, it's hard to get me angry, but when I do, like, it's I think understanding what that anger kind of feels like and what it does, like. When I get angry, when someone pushes certain buttons, if I haven't, especially in the morning, if I haven't taken my Adderall yet, if I haven't had my coffee yet, and then like all these things are coming at me, and I'm like, whoa, wait, hold, and it keeps coming. Like I know that I have to just remove myself because what's happening inside is I just want to beat somebody up. I want to punch a hole in the wall. I mean, I can't even be with myself right now. So I literally
Right.
I just go remove myself, and in 5 minutes of just okay, my brain is doing weird things, and just focus on calming. Just notice the sensation without judging it. I can bring myself back in
Back
5 or 10 minutes.
no, that's
Typically.
great. And the other thing I would say that I do, and you've seen me sip, you see me sipping water. The audience doesn't all see me sipping water, but I have clients who literally walk around with water bottles whenever they're with their kids because they know that their kids are their triggers. And so it's like, if I know that I'm in a triggered situation and I have a water bottle in my hand and I continue to drink water while I'm in a triggering situation, then, if you've got to have a really difficult meeting with somebody, make sure the water's there and make sure you're drinking because it'll keep you in that more prevention, calmer mode.
So you just made me think for the first time. So my wife always has a bottle of water with her, always
Maybe
everywhere.
she's just really mad at you all the time.
Maybe, it's like, is that the reason why she always has her bottle of water with her? I mean, and she can't believe, she gets mad at me when she's asking, have you drinking any water today? I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm really like
maybe.
a camel. I'll drink 2 glasses of water, just in a minute, and then I don't drink it all for a long time. She's like, if you're feeling thirsty, then you're already dehydrated.
Yeah.
Which is probably true.
So Eric, the other thing I want to just go back to, because I don't know where we're at with time, but with the ADHD brain particularly, that amygdala hijack, you're going from the frontal lobe to the primal part of the brain. Well, we all know that in the ADHD brain, the frontal lobe is the part that's most impacted by the ADHD. And so it's easier to shift out. It's harder to shift back. And, even as you start to get stressed out, my experience with many ADDers is that they lose the problem solving that they have even more quickly. And so I think it's really important to know that there's biology going on, just like with the Adderall and everything else. So the sips of water or the deep breaths or whatever else, taking ownership of your triggers and doing something actively to manage those is so critical for all of us, but especially folks who have ADHD.
So this is sort of maybe a tangential thought regarding the idea of triggers. One of the things that I see is, as I think even as a culture, which to me is sort of problematic, is this whole idea of having these trigger warnings everywhere, and that everything is a trigger warning. And that, because I think when we do that, we are creating a society that is not resilient, because we know we're dealing with PTSD, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that how do we actually address the symptoms is by exposing ourselves to the triggers and reacclimating and rewiring the brain, so we're not having that kind of heightened stress response in a situation that even the brain thinks it seems familiar. It's not the actual stress response. So I saw an article recently of something from a university where there was a complaint about something that was being taught, and there needs to be trigger warnings, and it's I take sort of issue with that from both a philosophical and academic kind of standpoint, because I don't think it's helpful if we are what's the word, denesthetizing? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, and avoiding it, that sort of thing. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I think that the other thing I would pull out of that as important for me is that getting triggered is really normal.
Yeah.
And, and I think that that's the piece of it is it's really what we do with it and how we manage it. And, and if you're the kind of person that tends to get triggered and you're not kind of going, you know what, I really need to be careful not to say that in front of my boss, or I really need to be careful that when I lose my cool, I've got to be able to go, do I need to take a few deep breaths? Do I need to take a time out? So I don't, we need to be careful not to say, oh, getting triggered is a bad thing. I think that it creates situations where we're uncomfortable and it can cause negative outcomes like crazy, but it's really human and very normal. But it's also something that we've got to become more conscious of, just like it is to manage your own ADHD.
Yeah, speaking of management, I'm looking at the time right now. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I know, I've been talking to some people who have done some of the courses at Impact ADHD that you guys have been been doing. I know that you have, I think, a new one that's coming up, or a launch that's coming up. So actually, I would love to talk with you about that. But first, we're going to take a quick break. So we'll be right back.
Audible.trial.com/ADHD Rewired for your free download. Trial.com/ADHD Rewired. Trial.com/ADHD Rewired. Go to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired for your free audiobook download.
And we are back. So, Diane, what we're going to talk about now is kind of what you and Elaine are doing at Impact ADHD. I know you have a launch coming up. Tell me a little bit about that.
No, so we do parent training and coaching, and we many of our parents have kids with ADHD. Many of our parents are ADHD themselves, but what we've really designed is a style of parenting that we really think is most helpful for kids who are, we call them complex kids, right? So whether your kid's ADD or dyslexic, I mean, even if, kids who are ADHD, 60% of them have something else going on, right? And so what we really do is help parents to change their approach to parenting. We call it the coach approach. And what we find is that, there's lots of information out there about what to do. It's just really hard to make it work. It's hard to make it work because we're overwhelmed. It's hard to make it work because maybe we're ADHD ourselves. And so it's really about helping parents to come up with an approach that is easy to put in place, but also is empowering for your kids, because what we want more than anything else is for our kids to become more successful, more independent over time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned we have a launch. We've got a program that we offer called Sanity School. And, I think that part of everything that we do is to help parents become more calm and confident. And, I'm talking about stress management. What I would tell you that I work with probably, I don't know if it's the number one thing, but it's close to the number one thing that I work with parents on is, how do I stop losing my cool? I've got parents kind of in two camps. Either they're so overwhelmed that they're in flight and it's like, I can't deal with this. I don't want to deal with, it's like they're hiding under their covers instead of parenting. And then I've got other parents who are just yelling at their kids more than they want to. And so I would say that staying calm and staying problem solving mode is one of the most important things that we work on. And then it's about figuring out, okay, so what do I do? And so what we teach in Sanity School is
I love that name, by the way. As soon as you said that, the kind of the marketing creative brain in me was thinking of 40 different ideas of taglines for for Sanity School and the different images that can go along with that.
Send them to me. I love them.
But my ADHD, I think of them and then they're gone. It's
well, no, but you got to give them to me and then I can take. That's why I'm the operations person, right?
Sanity School, it helps parents keep their cool.
Yeah. Sanity. Oh, I like that. Sanity School. Okay, I'm writing that down. But, so I think, so we teach parents really a different way of parenting, and we call it the coach approach to parenting. And it really is designed to empower our kids and to help them to become more independent, which is really ultimately what we want. Most of us, our kids need more directing. And when they're younger, they're in elementary school, we're helping them figure out what to do. We're helping them make sure that they do it. If we're ADD ourselves, it's hard to do that. And I have a lot of parents. I just had a mom that I was talking to this morning who was saying, I can barely manage my own ADHD. Yeah. How can I possibly help my kid to be more structured? And then, and part of it is about helping parents to understand what's really going on, because we tend to be in fix-it mode instead of really being curious and understanding the biology behind it. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that we always keep as a cornerstone is a positive relationship, because I think ultimately
it's so important.
Yeah, we want, I don't want my kid to be 30 years old going, yeah, I remember my mom used to yell at me all the time.
Right.
I want my kids to remember having a good time and enjoying each other's company and that sort of thing.
The way I describe it is your kid, if your kid, let's say they're in third grade and you have these nightly arguments over their math homework.
Yeah.
30 years from now, neither of you are going to remember what that actual argument was like, but both of you will remember what it was like growing up in your house, struggling over schoolwork. So we remember those feelings. We remember the relationships. And the one other thing that I want to kind of add to what you were saying, if you have ADHD and you have a child with ADHD, I think it is so critically important. If you want to help your child, you got to take care of your own ADHD first.
Yeah, no, being a great role model. And I think that that's really right. We've got a couple of parents in our groups that are ADHD. I would say about half of our parents are ADHD themselves, or suspect that they might be, and have not officially gone through the process, right?
Or don't realize that they are.
Or don't realize it yet. I had a mom who's like been in our group for a year, and all of a sudden she's like, maybe I am. And it's like, okay. Maybe you are, but you're right. It's for a couple of reasons. One is you're a role model. And I think that that's so critical, is that, if you want your child to be able to manage their own ADHD, managing your own is the best way to demonstrate. And it's the same thing when we were talking about stress and triggers. It's like, if I want my child to manage their own triggers, managing mine is the best way.
And when
you
say role model, I don't think you mean by all right, now I'm doing everything like perfectly. I think you mean you're acknowledging the struggle and you're showing the strategies for how to manage it. Right.
So if I ignore my own ADHD and I just kind of muddle through life, it's very different than if I say, you know what, I have ADHD. These are my challenges. This is what I'm doing to work on them. And I always encourage parents to be as transparent as they can. It's like, everybody needs to have, I have a hard time going to bed at night, Eric. And it's like, if I know that I've got a kid who has, if I have a hard time going to bed at night and my kid has a hard time going to bed at night, it's like, I'm up at 2 a.m. working, or I'm up at 2 a.m. watching the 3rd episode of Castle on Netflix that I started at 10 o'clock. I mean, it's, and I'm doing that and I'm not going, okay, I'm not getting enough sleep. That's me not managing my time. Yeah. And so my kid sees that. And if my kid's hyper-focused on Xbox, he doesn't see, I've got to figure out how to get off the Xbox so I can get enough sleep so I can get to school tomorrow and be successful. Right.
So it sounds like what you're saying is, talking with your kid and saying, I know it's hard to wind down at night. Like I'm having the same struggle. What do you think we can kind of do about that? Like what, is there anything that maybe we can do together to help each other out? Is that kind of what you're saying?
It is. And I think that, but it's becoming transparent. And again, it's the same thing with, if you're managing your own triggers. And I still remember very distinctly a conversation with my kids when I really lost it. This is back before I was doing like trigger management, but I realized
give us the down and dirty, Dan.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I totally lost it. I looked like a 3-headed monster, and I just railed on my kids for much longer than I want to admit. And no, there was no violence or anything, but it was it was like, okay. And so
not one of your prouder parenting
not moments. One of my prouder moments, but it's like, I came back and I'm like, you know what? I just totally lost it. I felt like something else had taken over my body. It was not something I did on purpose. I wasn't even aware that I was doing it until after I'd been doing it for about 10 minutes. And I'm really sorry. And I know I've got to do something to figure out how I don't get so upset that I'm just doing that, because it's just not okay. I'm sure it didn't feel good for you. It certainly doesn't feel good for me now, going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just yelled at my kids for 10 minutes. It's that sort of stuff. That it's the same thing with the ADHD. If the more transparent and honest you can be, having a difficult time being organized is a really normal part of being ADHD. It's a natural outspring. It's not a bad thing. It's just part of what happens when you have ADHD sometimes. And so sharing that with your kid and saying, I would rather be more organized. This is what I'm doing. Let's talk together. It can be really helpful. The thing I would just say is just be aware, and this is another thing we teach a lot of in both Sanity School and our other programs, is making sure your expectations are realistic for your kids.
And how do you help set that up? Walk us into a classroom of Sanity School.
Walk you through the classroom of Sanity School.
Yeah, give us one of the lessons.
One of the lessons is around shifting expectations. And so a lot of times what we do is we think that our kids should be the same as their peers, or, you're in 10th grade, you should be able to turn in your homework, or you're in 5th grade, you should be able to write down an assignment in your planner. You should be able to sit still at dinner and
a
lot of shitting all over yourself, right? Yeah. And so what I encourage parents to do is to say, okay, what is realistic for your kid? If your kid can't do it on their own 9 days out of 10, it may not be realistic. And it's important to know that the ADHD brain, as it's developing, tends to be 3 to 5 years behind its peers with regard to some of these things like managing impulses and we call it executive function, right? So organization, those, just kind of managing and doing what you want to be able to do. And so if you've got a kid who's in 5th grade, whose brain is really more like they're in first or kindergarten.
With those executive functioning.
With the executive functions. Now, these kids are brilliant. They're smart. Right. Intellectually, they may even be gifted. But if they don't have, if they have the executive function of a 1-year-old, where, or if they're a 5-year-old and they're losing their cool all the time and they're having meltdowns, more like a baby or a temper tantrum, or they're in 10th grade and they're having a hard time turning their homework in because they don't have the systems and structures in place. Figure out what a realistic expectation is. It's not that you're not going to raise the bar for them and challenge them to do more. But if you sit there and say, come on, Johnny, turn in your homework, and he doesn't know how to get his brain to remember to do that, you're going to be beating your head against the wall, which is where most people show up in our office is like, the things that I think I should be able to do just aren't working and I don't know what to do.
So what's something you would work with a parent on who's struggling with their kid to actually turn the homework in that they've been spent, and it's I have this conversation probably 5 times a week in my office. So
the first thing to do, Eric, is really to just get curious. And we call it, it's once you've decided, okay, I'm going to take aim on, we want you to start with one thing, so we take aim first, which is there's 700 challenges a day in the ADHD household. They are, it's like, so let's take aim on one. So you mentioned turning in homework. So then I'm going to get curious. What's going on? What's hard about it? Is he doing it and not turning it in? What's the environment in the classroom? If you've got an older child, they might be able to participate in a conversation about what's going on. A lot of times we'll ask our kids and they'll go, I don't know. Well, they really may not know. But so just to get curious and say, well, is it, that the teacher's not actually saying, please turn it in, or the teacher doesn't have a place to turn it in. Or what happens with my kid a lot of times is that it'll be a day late. And because he didn't turn it in when everybody else turned it in, there's no prompt for turning things in. And so he'll get through the entire class and he's like, oh man, I forgot to turn it in because she didn't say turn in your homework. So it's about kind of getting curious. And then it's saying, okay, so if that's really what's going on, what is realistic for my child, and what support, what we call it scaffolding, does my child need? Either help from the teacher, help from a structure, help from me. And so instead of kind of expecting them to be somewhere that they're not, you figure out where they are and you help them get to the next level of independence. Does that distinction make sense, Eric?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the whole idea of expectation management and getting curious when expectations aren't being met, I think those are two really just important elements towards a better management of ourselves and our emotions and just the overall of our ADHD. If we are expecting ourselves to do all the things that the quote unquote normal people do, it's like we're gonna feel crappy, But if we say, okay, this is hard, but I can do it, this way, which might be different than how you're doing it, which doesn't really matter. It's like if you're getting those things done some way, that's what matters. It's like it's physically, I know how to open mail, but it's hard for me to, I go and look at the pile of mail sitting on my desk. For me, that's one of those, that's like the turning in homework where it's like physically, it's not a hard thing to do, but it's just like I have zero motivation to do it. Yeah. But I know I have to do it, so I use strategies to help me.
Right. And so I think it kind of goes back on some level to the conversation about stress, is that if we think we should be able to do something, we're shooting all over ourselves. I should be able to remember that deadline. I should be able to do this. I should be able to do that. Then you're going to feel threatened because you can't. There's judgment there. Yeah. And that gets back to creating stress. And if you're stressed out, you're more in the primal part of your brain. You're no longer problem solving. You're not trying to figure out, well, how can I remember this deadline? You're getting pissed off at yourself because you can't, and it's causing you to fight or flight. And for some of us, I think it's interesting because as I said that, there's some of us that use the adrenaline from the fight or flight to motivate them. So it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I missed this deadline. I've got to get it done. And they're like beating themselves to get it done. And it's like they're using that stress to motivate them. And it can be very powerful, but it exhausts them and it wears them out. And eventually they're like Jell-O, right? Because you can't sustain that. You can't work off adrenaline all the time. You've got to find something else that motivates your brain.
And I think, the better you get at understanding of how long things actually take, you can, one of the things that I do when I'm working with clients too is once you have a real understanding of how long things actually take, and not using intuition, because we know that we have our intuitive sense of time is awful, but we can use a very good logical sense of time by tracking it and using feedback. And then you develop this kind of repertoire of, oh, okay, I think this will take me 10 minutes. It almost always takes me an hour. So now I know how long to schedule for that particular task. We could then almost utilize the just-in-time approach, where it's like you were waiting for the last minute, but it really is, it's the last ideal minute, not the past the last minute. Now you're freaking out, but the minute where you have to start now to be able to finish on time. So I think the better we really have of our self-awareness, we can use some of that biology of, okay, that I know I have to do this now. It helps me increase focus, but we're not getting past that threshold of freaking out, because having slightly elevated levels of stress can be very helpful, but going beyond a certain threshold is very damaging.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And so I think, again, what you said in that I want to restate is it's about being conscious, and so it's becoming aware of, how stressed out am I, and how am I managing my ADHD? Am I managing it with adrenaline? Am I managing it with structures? Am I judging myself? Am I having compassion for myself? Am I, it's the same thing if you're a parent. It's like, what am I doing with my kid? Am I judging my kid? Am I using adrenaline to manage my kid? Am I, because I got to tell you, I've got a lot of clients whose parents yelled at them when they were kids, and it really worked. It's like my former husband would tell you that he did not turn in his homework because his dad would have smacked him a little bit, if he had. And so he was, that's how he managed his ADHD when he was a kid. And most of us as parents, that's become a parenting style that is no longer what most of us want. And so I think that it's, we've got to figure out other ways of motivating the ADHD brain.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question here. So I have ADHD, and we have a child who's 4 years old at home. And my wife wanted to have 4 kids. I wanted to have 2, and now we're both thinking that 1 is plenty. And it was, so we had, this past weekend, we had a couple of our neighbor friends over, and they have 3 kids. And so we had 4 kids in our home. And when they left, the first thing I said to my wife, I was like, 1 is great. Like I was feeling so like sensorially overwhelmed by everything that was going on. And, and I've had conversations with people and so, you just get used to it. I have a hard time imagining that someone who maybe, like myself, who gets very overwhelmed and distracted by kind of extraneous stimuli with a lot of noises going on, I don't see how I would get used to that. My brain hears a lot of wah, 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 when there's too much like there's noise going on. If I were to enter your classroom and say, we have 2 kids now or 3 kids now, and I just can't, like them all talking at the same time, I just can't deal with it. My brain shuts down. How would you help me?
No, I think that it goes back to overwhelm management. I mean, I think that that's the thing is that, it's not so much getting used to it, but that you're managing the overwhelm, right? So in any situation, if you have 4 or 5-year-olds chirping at you at the same time, that's a lot of stimulus to process all at once, right? And so it's the same thing with the airplane, right? One of you is going, "Oh, this is awesome," and the other one's going, "No." So it's that conscious sort of thing. And so if I have a parent who's saying, "I'm completely overwhelmed by the situation that's going on with my child," it becomes, let's forget about your child for a week or 2 and just focus on you. And I think that that's one of the things that it's hard for parents to do, to say, wait, no, this is my child's problem. I have to help my child. But what I will tell you is if you get help for yourself as a parent, it's going to support you miles and miles of helping your kid, because the reality is that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
It's like a mega ultra marathon.
Yes, exactly. And if you've got a kid who's 5 or 9 or 14 or whatever it is, I mean, you're not going to wake up. For most of us, we don't wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden our kid is launched and successful and independent. I mean, there's something that I've got a 29-year-old stepson who's probably ADD, but never diagnosed. And every once in a while, actually he's 30 now, but every once in a while I get a call and it's like, okay, here we go. It's like we're back into parenting mode, and it's a marathon. But so what I would say is that be willing to consider that getting some support for yourself is what's really most important, which is why Sanity School is helpful, because it's not a class that your kid takes. It's a class that you take. And one whole module of it is about we call it self-care, right? So it's about how do you make sure that you have enough energy to be able to parent the way that you need to, because it's the marathon. And we use the oxygen mask, right? We're back to airplanes again. But, it's like the lady on the airplane, the guy on the airplane says, put your own oxygen mask on first before you put on your child's. And it's such an important thing to do. And we always forget it. But if you're overwhelmed or you're stressed out or you're, frustrated, you're not going to be able to parent effectively. I can tell you that. I mean, there's rare exception can a parent well from that place. And so the goal is to get parents to a place where they're calm enough so that they can problem solve. And then once they kind of are in that space, we give them all kinds of great tools and strategies and ideas for how to more systematically go, okay, whatever the challenge du jour is, because there's always a different challenge every day.
Yep.
And what do I do in this moment? And we've created a great model. We call it the parenting action model that really is designed to be any challenge, whether it's homework or emotional intensity, or we call it morning mania, which is, it's like, how do I get my kid up?
I love your guys' alliterations.
Isn't that great? Yeah. But so it's really about figuring out how to just be with the reality of having a family where somebody or multiple people have ADHD.
And then I think that you had just said something too that I think is so spot on. The more I learn about ADHD, and I've been managing my own ADHD for, at least I've known I've had ADHD since I was 19, and I'm 35 now. So the more I learn about my own self-management and learn from a kind of clinical academic perspective, to have better time management, we need better self-care. To have better self-management, we need better self-care. To have better behavior management as parents, we need better self-care. It all comes down to, are we taking care of ourselves? Because everything trickles through us. So anything that we want to do better, we have to focus on ourselves and making sure we're taking care of ourselves so we can do the things that we want to do better in life.
Yeah.
So Dan, let people know where they can learn more about Sanity School, and when does class start and all that.
Yeah. So the program is getting ready to get started, and we did an event on the 27th, which is a live event. We call it From Chaos to Calm, and it's a free webinar that we did. And if people sign up, they can get access to that webinar, learn a little bit more about us, learn a little bit more about Sanity School, and then sign up. And so if people go to sanityschool.com is the best place to find out information about the upcoming program. And if you want to join us at impactadhd.com, that's another place to go as well.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you for spending the hour with me and with ADHD Rewired. If you want to have an impact on ADHD and get your ADHD rewired, now you have a new resource to use and to utilize. I know that you guys are doing great work in the ADHD community, so I just want to thank you for everything that you and Elaine are doing.
Oh, and thank you, Eric. I love what you're doing here. I think it's so great to connect with your audience today, and I know that you're bringing such a variety of information to a really hungry audience. So thanks for what you're doing as well.
Well, thank you so much. And Diane Dempster just helped all of us get our ADHD rewired. Thank you for listening to another episode of ADHD Rewired. And if you're new to the show, welcome to ADHD Rewired. We are more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. You can see a full outline of this and all other episodes with all the links and other resources mentioned during this interview at ADHDrewired.com. Help support this podcast by checking out my sponsors. I use Zoom video conferencing nearly every day, and so can you. Go free or go pro. But please go to erictivers.com/Zoom so they know that I sent you. And you can get a free audiobook from Audible at erictivers.com/Audible. And next time you shop Amazon, use the Amazon search portal at ADHDrewired.com. A small percentage of your purchase will go to support this show, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. You can also support this podcast by leaving an honest rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher. This really helps other people find this show. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Don't just be a passive listener, be an active member of the ADHD Rewired community. We are on Facebook. You can like our page, but please submit your request to join our free and growing community. And don't forget to check your other inbox because I screen everybody before they come into our community.
Looking for a coach? If you're still listening at this point and you answered yes, come to my website at ADHDrewired.com and schedule your free 20-minute consultation, or call me at 224-993-9450. Is your school, business, or organization hiring speakers? I provide fun and engaging presentations full of practical solutions that both educate and entertain. Hire me for your next professional development day or corporate training event. Go to ADHDrewired.com/talks. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.